Lamada. He will be starting soon. Oh, story time with Mr. Lamada, where all your dreams come true. Oh, he brings to life your favorite stories with a great big smile. You won't live lonely, won't you start all reading? I just can't wait to be hearing story time with Mr. Lamada. He will be starting soon. Oh, story time with Mr. Lamada, where all your dreams come true. Oh, he brings to life your favorite stories with a great big smile. You won't leave lonely, won't you start all reading? I just can't wait to be hearing.
Good morning and welcome to Storytime. Thank you for joining us on this lovely Wednesday morning. Thank you for being here, and I hope that you are having a lovely week so far and wish you a beautiful one the rest of it. Thank you so much for joining me. And as you know, today we are reading the updated version of Enough. And this one will be read, of course, by the author herself, Emily Easton. And so do join in for that one. And as you know, this one is illustrated by ZIYUE CHEN. Thank you so much for joining in. Good morning to you and welcome to Storytime. And of course, we'll be reading it with permission of Penguin Random House. Thank you so much for being here. Good morning to you. Enough. And yes, you might remember we read this one before, the original version, and now there are updates to it. So find out why Emily thought she needed to make updates to this book and why it is timely and important right now. Thank you so much for joining me today. Please let me know where you're joining us from and who is joining in with you. And I know that there's been heat waves going on around the country, so I hope where you are is cool and lovely, and I hope that you are staying safe and cool. Thank you so much for joining in, and please tell me where you are and who is joining in with you. And I hope you're ready for this wonderful book that we have for you today. I am sure you will be leaving here inspired and definitely encouraged to show up and definitely make sure that justice prevails. Thank you so much for joining in and welcome to Storytime. Amanda West, good morning to you. How are you doing out in Illinois? And you say, yes, we are so excited to hear about this updated version. Absolutely. Amanda, you and I both, and of course, I know Sarah and Nathan are equally excited to be here. Thank you so much for joining in. Good morning to you out in Illinois. Good morning to you, Soraya in Oakland. How are you doing today, sweetheart? Thank you so much for joining in. I am glad you're here with us. And of course, Sharon Lungo, good morning to you as well. Welcome to Storytime. Thank you so much for being here. And another one in Chicago. How are you doing today? Ellen Edwards, good morning to you. And say my daughter Rebecca is visiting Oakland. Well, welcome to Oakland, Rebecca. It is a little bit hot, not too hot, I think just right. So you are welcome. You're coming in at the right time. Thank you so much for joining us today. But without much ado, I have a special guest today joining me, and we have Miss Emily Easton joining us today on Storytime. Please help me in welcoming Emily to Storytime.
Hi, everyone. I'm so pleased to be here with you.
Good morning, Emily. How are you doing today?
I'm doing really well.
It is good afternoon to you on your end.
2:00 for me.
Well, thank you so much for being here on Storytime today. And, this book is just amazing. It's one I love so much. I fell in love the first time I read it. And then knowing that there's an updated version was just also double, whoa, yes, let's reach out and ask Emily what this one is all about. So I don't know if you want to just, tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe just to touch on the book a little bit, and then we go into the story, and then we'll have more conversation after that.
Sure. So I am actually usually on the other side of the book and the other side of the desk. I'm a co-publisher of Crown Books for Young Readers at Penguin Random House, and I've been in the business for a long time. I specialize in books of nonfiction and diverse voices, and this book just flowed out of me. It was a combination of personal experience and so many other books and people that I've been fascinated with my whole career, and it just all flowed out, all of a piece.
Yeah, no, that is awesome, and definitely want to hear more about that. And I know a few more people have joined us. Sam Black, I know you're here, and of course Pamela Courtney as well, Iris and Zola, and then of course Braylon, Kavaya, and Chad. But Emily, the floor is yours. Please take us through the book, and then we'll be back together soon.
Great. I will start with my note at the beginning. There's nothing visual, so I'm not going to hold up this, but we'll start here. A few weeks before the Parkland shooting, I was in Florida with my cousins for a family wedding. On Valentine's Day, a shooter went on a rampage at the school. Thankfully, Samantha and her brother Ryan were both physically fine, though some of their friends sadly weren't. But everything changed from that moment on. Samantha was too young, but Ryan was part of the group that organized the March for Our Lives, and their older brother Matthew took a leave of absence from college to help the movement too. I felt inspired by these teens, like so many people did, and also felt a sense of wonder that my cousins were joining the public canon of activists who made important changes in our country. I was moved to make a list of other protesters who stood up and said enough, and was reminded that America itself was formed as a protest against England. Protest is part of America's DNA, and I wanted to share this realization in a book for young people. I especially wanted to show the many ways protesters have stood, marched, sat, or knelt for change, in simple enough language for young readers to understand and feel inspired. Founding fathers like Samuel Adams and new activists like my cousin Ryan and Black Lives Matter supporters have kept our country moving ever closer to its ideals. My hope is that their actions will inspire young people to find their own way to fight to make America better. Our country needs them. And then I got a foreword from my cousin Ryan to share his thoughts about what happened to him and the importance of this book. Whether I was doing a tight set at a comedy club, bussing tables at the local restaurant, or writing late into the night for the school paper, life was simple and senior year was almost over. Then a hurricane came through our town in the form of a lone gunman. People found solace from the pain in groups that aimed to make a difference. Some friends of mine came together hailing never again, and I was happy to add my voice. We demanded action and social justice from a system that allowed children to be harmed in a classroom. We assembled our troops, students, teachers, parents, children, and even some politicians joined the fold, all to inspire hope and love to overpower our pain. The key is inspiration. Tragedy does not hold the only source. You can look to history for guidance, and people like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Ruby Bridges, and the freedom riders of the civil rights movement, who all showed that peace and compassion go a long way toward creating balance in our society. There's no telling how our actions will impact this world, but we are determined to continue our efforts to protect other communities from the horrors we faced. Anyone is able to join this fight. All you need is passion in your heart and a way to share it, online, in a crowd with a memorable sign, with something as small as a crayon or a pen. Anyone can help bring change. You can too. Ryan Deitch. Okay, so now we're going to get into the book. I'm going to figure out the best way to do this. Samuel threw a tea party. Harriet led the way. Susan cast her vote. Woody sang for you and me. And there's a little bit of the lyric, is this land made for you and me? Rosa kept her seat. Ruby went to school. Rachel wrote a book, just like me. Martin had a dream. Cesar and Dolores said no grapes. Muhammad refused to fight. And we have one of his famous quotes, "I ain't got no quarrel with them Viet Cong." Tommy and John raised their fists, and you'll recognize them from the original hardcover cover. John and Yoko stayed in bed. Gilbert sewed a rainbow. Jazz wore a dress. And we have one of her quotes, "I am so happy to finally be allowed to wear a beautiful princess gown like the other girls." Colin took a knee. America said, "Time's up." Parkland demanded never again. And here's our new spread that we were able to add. Black Lives Matter supporters marched and marched. And then at the back of the book, which I will read one entry because it takes too long to read them all, we have Why These Protestors Said Enough, where you can find out a lot more information about each one of them. And I wanted to read the one about Tommy Smith and John Carlos, who were on the original cover. For those of you, well, I'll just read it. I'm excited to read about them because they really inspired me. Tommy Smith and John Carlos raised their fists in support of human rights on October 16, 1968, at the Summer Olympics in Mexico City. As they walked to the winner's podium to accept their gold and bronze medals respectively, they took off their shoes to protest poverty in America. They each wore something around their neck to draw attention to lynchings of Black people. Tommy wore a scarf and John wore beads. John also unzipped his tracksuit in support of working people. They each borrowed a black glove from Australian silver medalist Peter Norman, who stood in solidarity with them and raised a gloved fist. The crowd began to boo immediately, and both athletes were ordered to leave the stadium. The next day, Tommy and John had to return their medals, and both were suspended from the Olympic team. They later were banned from the Olympics for life. As time passed, people's view of this event changed. Their protest has become an iconic and respected moment in the fight for civil rights. And then we feature a quote from each person in the book. So Tommy Smith said, "We are Black and we are proud of being Black." And John Carlos said, "If something is broke, I think every man, woman, and child should step up to the plate and try to have this thing fixed." So you can see that there is so much to discover about each of the people in the book. And I really hope that it's going to inspire young readers to join the fight and be inspired to fight for what matters most to them.
Oh, thank you. That is beautiful, Emily. Thank you so much. And, as you were reading, I was just thinking of the different quotes that are in that book that I've been looking at, but also just, I know that this one is personal to you. There is that personal element to it of the inspiration. Do you want to talk about that a little bit more? Like, why did you feel that enough needed to be written? And maybe even in a way, like, why even did it need an update?
Yes. So, as I mentioned, it was very personal when the Parkland shooting happened. And about 10 days later, my cousins Ryan and Matthew came to New York because Ryan was going to be interviewed on MSNBC. And we went out to breakfast, and I was just so amazed. They were fielding texts and calls from people from the White House, from major news networks. Everybody wanted to talk to them and their friends. And they were so changed by what happened immediately, but I could tell that they were all pouring it into this movement. And as Americans, so many of us were inspired by the fact that they just weren't going to accept this. This group of teenagers were saying what so many of us felt, but we all felt powerless. And they refused to be powerless. They just kept speaking out and speaking out. And I walked away from that breakfast just with the gears spinning in my head. And I was taking the bus home. I just started a list of all these people who have inspired me in the past. And that my cousins were on the list was just crazy. I knew them since they were babies, and here they were being these incredible change makers. And I thought about all the books that I had published over the years. Many of the same people are featured in this book. And I just felt like writing a book is a form of protest. You don't only have to march, you can do so many other things. But the important thing is to do something. And I wanted young people to see that they could do whatever was most meaningful to them. But I wanted to pass that torch to them.
Oh, that's...
And then
I'm
sorry. And then the reason that we updated for the new edition, there were a couple of reasons. Most importantly was George Floyd's murder, which obviously changed the world. And it had a very strong personal impact on me. And I was very committed that I wanted to find a way to get that into the book. But I also was so in awe of Darnella Fraser, who took the video that showed this to the world and had the courage to upload it and share it on social media and make sure that people saw it. And I think, most people who do these things, they don't always know what the impact on their own personal lives are going to be. And most of them have had to suffer in some way for what happened, at least initially. And I know that Darnella Fraser's life has been totally upended. And originally, I really wanted to feature her in the book and say that, something about Darnella made a movie or something like that, and to show that moment. But then we realized she's so young and she was going to be going through so much, and we didn't want to add to that at all. But that was what started the whole conversation. And for those of you who don't know how books are made, I just want to show how we were able to do that. Is in a hardcover book, you have end papers where they're glued down to the hardcover. And when you do a paperback, you don't need to keep those end papers in the same way. So we stole pages from the end papers to add the additional spread showing the Black Lives Matter supporters. So this used to be a page that was devoted to the end papers. And then we were able to expand the back matter and add their story back here, and to also add some resources for readers who want to know more. And then the other thing that we did was we changed the cover image to Colin Kaepernick instead of Tommy and John, who you just heard about. And the reason that we did that was I was thinking about how much Colin went through and how much he gave up for such a peaceful protest that was well within his rights to do, but he's lost his entire career. And when we first did the book, that wasn't as apparent, that he was not going to be able to work in his given profession anymore. And I just felt like we needed to honor the sacrifice that he made.
That he made.
So that was why we switched the cover.
Oh yeah, no, that's a great insight into also that thinking behind all this, because we see, you know, like I see it and I saw that there was a change in the cover, but then I was wondering, like, yeah, why is that? So it's really, I mean, I know that the work that Colin has done is just amazing and bringing that awareness to it, and so yeah, but also, you know, like the story of you know, John and you know, like they were kicked out of the Olympics too at that
They
point.
were, and they lost their medals. They had to give back their medals.
Yeah. And it's just so it shows that it comes at a price. And one of the quotes in the book too that is mentioned in there, it says, "We've got work to do," and this is from America Ferrera and the group, and it says, "We've got work to do for the next generation. Let's get to it." And I thought that was so powerful. For you, Emily, what is that work that we need to get to, that we need to get done?
Well, I think we all know that America is set up on great ideals, but we don't quite live up to them. And, you know, I think it's the job of every generation to bring us forward closer and closer to those ideals. And often it's the younger people who push for the change and inspire the older people to make the change. And so I want young people to understand that they have a part to play in making our country what it should live up to. It's a process, and sometimes it goes forward, it goes backward, there's reactions, but it's something that we all should be fighting for.
Well, no, I love that you mentioned it's a process and it's ongoing. We cannot sit back. We need to be like just if you look at, say, even just the case of when we talk about it, the Olympics in '68, and then you have some of that people appreciating that so much later.
Yes. Yeah. You just don't know how long it will take for people to appreciate what you've done.
Right.
And when you're going through the struggles, I'm sure it's very challenging. And I'm sure some people have had second thoughts. Why did I do this? But in the end, it's all worth it.
Right. No, it's true. Because even you mentioned Colin Kaepernick too, same thing. We see that at times it felt like he was alone.
Yes.
He felt like he was alone for so long. And then to see him, I think, get that recognition for the work that he was doing, I appreciated that. And I think, you know, like it is such an honor from you to also put him on the cover of the book.
Well, you know, I think it's interesting when you think about patriotism and what people think of as patriotism in America. Oftentimes it's the conservative point of view, and they feel like they own the idea of being patriotic. And I think some of the protests against what Colin was doing was wrapped up in all of that. Like, how dare he kneel during the national anthem? That's not patriotic. But actually, it was very patriotic. And we fought for the right to have freedom of speech and freedom of expression. And to try and shut that down, that's not patriotic at all.
Right.
So I think I think it's essential that we show both sides that it is patriotic to protest. And that a more progressive viewpoint is very much a part of the patriotic story of America.
Right. No, absolutely. And then, you know, with all that in mind, like, how do you hope that people will engage with Enough? You know, both the original version and this updated version. How do you hope people will engage, and what would be your ideal scenario?
Yeah, so I wrote it the way that I did, where it's very simple in the main section of the book for two reasons. One, so that it can be shared with young children. It's very simple, and it's very easy to show them what they can do and how they can get inspired. And then for older readers, I think it sparks a discussion. there's room for you to receive the information and then respond to it in many different ways. And it's a great discussion starter. I've heard from a lot of even 5th and 6th grade teachers who have told me that they're using it exactly for that reason. And then the information at the back can help you with more information that can come into the discussion that you have.
Right.
But, go ahead.
No, and I was just going to say too, like talking about more information on the back, you've also added that extra page that that has more information and say where to read more about these historic protesters, and it's right there on the back too, so people now even have greater, a wider selection of sources, of resources.
Yeah, and I hope that people will get excited to know more about each of these people and really learn about them. And the more you know about them, the more you feel motivated to do something yourself, I think.
Yeah, no, and one of the things too that you mentioned, I just to on that comment, you're saying, I hope that people can get to learn more about these people that you featured in here. And just this morning, I've read this book multiple times, and since it arrived, also just looking at it, so like preparing for discussion. But then also, I remember I was looking at it, and it talked about Rachel Carson, and was it Rachel Carson I was thinking about? Yes, Susan B. Anthony. Sorry, Susan B. Anthony and the vote. So I was thinking about, and then in the book you mentioned that she died 14 years before the 19th Amendment was passed, and it was just a point for me, like as you're saying, like to read more about people. And I had, for some reason in my head, I just assumed that she lived to see that. And even though I've talked, read about her and talked about it, but it was just a detail that I'd kind of forgotten. And then today, as I was going through this book and remembering, and sometimes those things that we do, the seeds that we plant, we might not always be able to see them come to fruition.
That's right. It's for future generations as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then sometimes there are people who we think we know so well, like Woody Guthrie, right? We all grew up singing "This Land Is Your Land."
Yeah.
We mostly don't know the later verses of that song, which are all about that, the way the world had been set up. It wasn't that this land was available for you and me, and that is not fair, and that is not the promise of our country. And, he really was very provocative and he was an instigator, and he would travel around the country trying to stir things up. But it really got homogenized in the way that he has been presented to children over the years.
And they're talking about the issue of land, and we see now that there's been better recognition of where this land originally, who originally inhabited it, and who it belonged to. And so I hope that more organizations, more books like this can continue to push us to think deeply about things, to critically think about these things. And I really appreciated that. Same thing with, Woody Guthrie. I felt like I've sang that song many times, but it was one of those two that I didn't really think deeply about what else he had done. And so I appreciate that. And then I was just thinking too, like putting out a book like this, you're putting yourself out there and being vulnerable in a sense too. So, Bell Hooks, the feminist, she says, empowerment cannot happen if we refuse to be vulnerable while we're, talking to others, teaching others. And so what are some of those ways? This is a big way that you're putting yourself out there. Many people, I'm sure, will have things to say about the book or things to say about the presentation. But then how do you take that in stride? And what are some other ways that you feel like you put yourself out there, you make yourself vulnerable in order to drive these points home?
Well, certainly there are people who strongly disagree with my point of view in this book. And I think that's fine. It doesn't have to be for everybody, but I hope people will approach it with an open mind. But I certainly have heard from some people who don't really care for it. And I don't mind that, because if it's important enough and you believe in something, you should put it out there and stand behind it.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mentioned that I'm a publisher, and I've written with other people. I've helped them, from behind the desk. And then I had an experience where I was working with Scott Kelly, the astronaut who was in space for a year. And I got to co-write a picture book with him about his life story. And he really inspired me because he just believes, like, if you dream something, you can make it happen. You just have to do it. You have to risk things, and you have to risk failure, and you have to risk criticism. But if you believe in something, then you do it. And it meant a lot to me. And that was maybe a year and a half before I wrote this book. And maybe if I hadn't had that experience with him, I would have hesitated. But it really did change me to get to know him and work with him, and to take in his message. It really is something that we all can learn from.
Yeah, and like just let's see what the people are saying out there too. Like I honestly, I appreciate this book, and I found so much value in it, and just learning more and thinking critically about those things, even questioning myself as I'm reading certain books, questioning what the book is saying and thinking about it. But I think that's part of why it is out there, so that we can have those conversations within ourselves, but also with the greater community. And I see there too that Amanda and Sarah and Nathan in Illinois say, we think it's important, and we appreciate you for writing.
Well,
That. Thank
you. That means a lot to me.
It's really thanks, Amanda. I agree with you. Like, it's absolutely wonderful. And then this is Ingrid in Argentina, and says love and inspiration are the words that come to mind and heart, of course, when listening to Emily. So you are, like, it is, and I feel those. I feel your connection to the book. I've had a benefit of also following you on Instagram, and being able to see what things that you share and how passionate you are about something, which gives me an extra layer into how you feel about that. But also just more love there for you from Harmony Beth saying.
Thank you.
What is something that surprised you about the book, whether the creative process of it, or like just the material itself as you were researching?
A couple of things come to mind. One was an experience that I had with my colleagues. When we were first showing the cover of Tommy and John, a lot of the young people who I worked with did not even know that they were real people and that this really happened. And there was discussion like, why are we putting this on the cover? And it's so important that people's sacrifices don't get forgotten, and that we keep these things alive, and that we keep introducing these stories to younger people so that they don't forget about it. So that was one thing. Now I forgot what the other thing was that I was going to say.
No,
It'll come back to me.
We'll come back to it. If it comes back, we'll come back to it for sure. But I think that element of you, like, listening to those voices, listening to other people share what they're thinking, and also like being inspired by somebody else. Like, how difficult was it coming from the other side of the publishing world, like where you have been giving advice, and I'm sure you're giving advice back and forth, but also like being in this situation where then you had to put your work out there and having people talk about it, and maybe in ways that you don't agree at times.
Yeah, for me, I didn't mind when people don't agree with it, because I went into it expecting that there was going to be that. What was harder was to talk about myself as an author, and to like sort of promote myself as an author. I find that really hard. I had no problem being the biggest cheerleader for any of my authors. I love doing that, but to talk about myself was a lot harder for me. And so, yeah, that's the hardest thing.
That's amazing. And then too, like, the little kids out there, how can they play a part in like from your standpoint, like how can they play a part, and why is that important that we involve them now?
Well, if you think back to last summer and all the protests that were going on, there were so many young children there.
Mm-hmm.
And that made me very happy because they were out in the streets and seeing people so passionate about change. Think about the freedom riders in the past, and they weren't young children, but they were young people who really put their bodies on the line, for change. And I would love teachers to have projects where kids are, coming up with their own ideas and their own creations and ways that they want to put themselves out there, what's important to them, and how would they want to change the world.
Yeah.
Part of the process of doing the book was who didn't you include, who you really wanted to include, and then doing the back matter. There's so much I wanted to say about people, but you only had a very small amount of space.
Yeah.
And choosing the words that you wanted to feature for each person. I would love to see kids find quotes from each of these people that mean something to them. And these are words that you can carry with you to inspire you to your own action. I think about these words all the time.
Yeah, no, that's amazing, because I was actually thinking that was going to be my other question. And like, people say, I've talked to a few people and they say writing never ends. Like even your final draft is never really your final. Like there are always changes you could make. There are always the feelings of maybe I could have done this, I could have done that. And so, like listening to you talk about that back matter and maybe people you could have added. So are we going to have a part 2?
Well, I don't know. We haven't done one yet, but I would love to. I just think there's so many other people out there, possibly maybe more of a worldview, people around the world rather than just in America. I think that would be a wonderful next step.
Yeah.
But there's just so many people. And I remembered what I wanted to say about one thing that was surprising in doing the book.
Yeah.
When I was researching Muhammad Ali, and I actually had done a picture book about him, so I knew a bit about it, but I hadn't been as focused on the part where he lost his championship and he was potentially going to go to prison, and it came down to the Supreme Court. And although the decision is unanimous, originally it was a tied decision. And the one Supreme Court justice had a clerk who advocated so strongly on his part and gave him Muhammad Ali's writings and turned this justice into such a passionate supporter that he swayed all the other justices.
Wow.
So there was an example of this anonymous person who we don't know, but who really changed the fate of Muhammad Ali.
Wow.
And that impacted so many people who went on to support him and to risk protesting other things.
Right. No, that's amazing. I didn't know that. And also just to think about it as I was looking at the book and just thinking about how you put it. So it shows how close this decision being made going either way. And so, and those little things, again, just like those little, so many little things or things that are hidden at times that may feel as though, is this having an impact? Is this something that is being helpful? But to see that something happened like that and that had such a big impact on such a, like a powerful moment in history, appreciate that. And then Harmony Beth, just taking us back to what we had talked about earlier, and she says, perhaps the most important thing isn't necessarily to get people to agree, but rather to inspire them to ask questions and communicate in gentle, respectful ways with others having different opinions. Do you feel enough does that, or enough is doing that?
I do. I have heard from a lot of teachers, and they tell me about a lot of discussions in the classroom and how it really has inspired a lot of kids. And if there are teachers, Random House has created this teacher's guide that is also available online.
Oh.
So maybe I didn't give you the link, but I'll follow up with that in case people
for sure.
are interested. But within it, there are classroom activities and things about pulling out a quote or coming up with a chart of like what different forms of injustice have been and who fought against them, and kids could make their own chart of what they think needs to be changed now and how they think it should be changed. So there's a lot of great projects in there.
Oh, thank you, Emily. And like just to wind up, what is some advice that you have out there for like, and I know you wear many hats, and from like as an author and a publisher, like what advice do you have for authors out there, for those dreaming of writing out there, and even also our little ones, like what words of them?
Well, there are so many stories of people who got rejected over and over and over, and then ultimately found the right editor to champion them. Potter, A Wrinkle in Time. And I think that you have to persevere, and you have to find the right editor, because when you find somebody who's in sync with what you're trying to accomplish, that partnership will enrich the book, make it so much better, and will be your champion out in the world. But then you have to try and also, if you're a writer, you have to find the right literary agent who also serves that purpose, because so many publishing companies don't accept manuscripts unless they come through a literary agent. So many of them have blogs, they have social media, so you can follow them and you can see what kinds of things they love and they're drawn to, and you'll find the right champion that way.
Right.
And also, it's a lot of work. And for kids, it's important to know that you don't write something once and now it's perfect and it's ready to go, even if it's really wonderful. You really revise, you think you've gotten it as far as it needs to go, and then somebody says something that sparks it to be even better. So you just have to be open to the process.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. Thank you so much. And I really appreciate that. And then you had mentioned too, like where people can find enough. And I think those ones are some of the indie stores you mentioned.
Yes. So near where I live is Little City Books in Hoboken, New Jersey, and McNally Jackson in Manhattan. But also there's a website called bookshop.org, where you can find the independent store near you if you want to support your own local store. And it's a great way to connect if you're looking to support indies.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much. Yeah. Well, Emily, thank you so much for being here on Storytime today and sharing this powerful message with us. And of course, encouraging us, imploring us to think critically about these individuals that are in here and what they did. I really appreciate that. And it's definitely something for me to be keeping thinking over the summer, and how I can bring it to my students when we come back in the fall. Thank you so much for being here, for your time.
Thank you for having me. And you've been such a strong supporter of the book. I really appreciate it. And everyone out there, thank you for taking the time to listen today.
Oh, no, thank you. No, I absolutely believe in the book and the message it carries. And also, like just having talked to you, just appreciate the passion that you bring to it and what you hope it can achieve. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Right. I'll catch you in the back. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining me today. That was Emily Easton, author, publisher, many hats that she wears, and she was here telling us more about that book. I hope you learned a thing or two. I definitely did, and I hope that we go out there and apply what we've learned, and also just think critically. I hope that it sparks those conversations in our households, in our communities, and of course in our schools. Thank you so much for being here with me today. thank you for your time. Always appreciate it. Never take it for granted. And I wish you and your loved ones a wonderful, wonderful day. And I wish you the best of weather. I know that there's heat waves and all sorts of things going around, but I hope that you are well and okay. And definitely, please follow those health guidelines out there, so that we can stay healthy and, of course, be able to hug our loved ones and see our loved ones soon. Thank you so much for being here. Much love from me. Please join me tomorrow when we're back for another amazing book. And tomorrow we'll be reading Be Kind by Pat Zitlow Miller. So do join in for that one, and I will see you again for today. Have yourselves a wonderful day, you and your loved ones out there, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Mr. Lamada, he will be starting soon. Story time with Mr. Lamada, where all your dreams come true. He brings to life your favorite stories with a great big smile. You won't live lonely, won't you start on a reading? We just can't wait to hear him. Brings to life your favorite stories with a great big smile. You won't live lonely, won't you start on the reading? We just can't wait to hear